All right, take number 356 or something. Sorry, I had a cat jump in front for the last one. My name is Daniel McCullough. I'm going to be doing a presentation on performance-enhancing drug use amongst increasingly young demographics. So, what do I mean by performance-enhancing drugs? Well, this is any drug or exogenous substance that is used for a chemical effect. In this case, performance-enhancing meaning it's used for competition or for some sort of anabolic purpose, right? And by young demographics, I'm generally referring to, in this case, for the studies I used, middle school age all the way up to 20. So, overview of the problem. PED use amongst young populations has increased dramatically. Well, what that means is the use of these anabolic substances, androgenic substances, stuff like steroids, trenbolone acetate, dianabol, SARMs, whatever you want to call this stuff, that's all gone up. Same with even other types of PEDs like growth hormone, erythropoiesis stimulating compounds, even stimulants like caffeine. You could probably even say methamphetamine, though that one's not as common. All this has gone up, including in the young athletes like middle schoolers and high schoolers. Now, this leads, of course, to a lot of health complications, unhealthy attitudes amongst the population. So by that I mean body dysmorphia becomes more common, negative opinions around performance and physique. These are all kind of causes of this issue. So we have to address these different causes, such as the ones I've provided just now, and propose some solutions. How are we going to fix this? Well, let's go over that. First, let's start with a little bit of statistics. Everybody loves statistics, right? So, the rate of PED use, teen androgenic substance abuse has gone up to 5.9% of male teens. This is as of 2012. Now, what that means is anabolic steroids, specifically drugs that have to do with androgens, basically testosterone. Right? Growth hormone use overall has increased by 6%. So, it was at 5%. It's now 11% as of, again, 2012. That's not a small number, but growth hormone, while not an anabolic substance, quote unquote, it is a PED and is generally used for recovery, but there's plenty of negative side effects with that as well. And then 3.3% of total high school student population. So this is boys, this is girls, right? That is the amount of people that are currently using some form of PED. That's not a small number. Now, what are the potential adverse effects? Well, that all depends on the compound being used. I can't compare a selective androgen receptor module, so like SARMs, with maybe MK677, which is more geared towards recovery, or compare that to trenbolone acetate, which is an anabolic steroid. It's all going to depend on the compound being used because they all work a little differently, so it's going to change what effects you get out of it. For simplicity, we're going to separate them out. So we're going to kind of lump in the anabolic androgenic compounds, the ones that increase testosterone in some way or another, and then other forms of PEDs like erythropoiesis stimulating compounds and stimulants, that kind of stuff. All right, so what is the usage of anabolic androgenic compounds? Well, makes you bigger. Muscular hypertrophy, also known as gaining muscle. So the way hypertrophy works is we don't actually change the amount of cells we have. Muscle cells are kind of set. Hypertrophy, what we do is we expand that, and that's what creates larger muscles. That's what we work for at the gym. Now, having more testosterone, especially free testosterone, means you have more ability to produce bigger muscles. Really dumb way of saying it, easiest way to understand. It also, of course, will increase muscular strength because of that. Because that's the whole point of skeletal muscle mass, right? It's to move our joints. And it works by either binding on androgen receptors or through exogenous testosterone increases. So it will all increase testosterone to an extent. The difference between like something like SARMs or anabolic steroids is, sorry about that, he wanted to be in the frame. Anyway, the difference between the two is SARM is going to like selectively bind to muscle tissue versus an anabolic steroid, which is going to kind of have an overall systematic effect on different tissues and increase your testosterone. Now, Stuff like trenbolone acetate, dianabol, testosterone, and SARMs are all going to be included in this category. All right, we're going to keep the other ones separate. So, what are some of the adverse effects? Well, let's go over medical terminology 101. Hepatic dysfunction. This means liver failure. Hepatic is just kind of synonymous with liver. Acne. Don't really have to explain what that one is. It sucks. Gynecomastia. Now, this would be fine on women. Women are supposed to have breast tissue. It's development of breast tissue. Men are not supposed to have gynecomastia. So, I can imagine it wouldn't be fun if when you're a man growing up, all of a sudden, oh, look at that, you have boobs. So, suppression of hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. That's a fancy way of saying it's going to mess up your hormones, especially with androgens. Disordered lipid profile. This is stuff like your cholesterol, so your low-density lipoprotein compared to high-density lipoprotein. Premature closure of this is a hard one to pronounce, sorry about that. Epiphyseal plates. Now, I'm not very good at pronouncing some of these words, so please forgive me, but that just means closure of growth plates. So, of course, if you're still growing, you do not want to stop your growth plates from expanding. You're going to be shorter. You're going to stop growing earlier. Neurological changes. Well, in this case, when I say abnormal, I'm talking about a negative effect. Not, oh, he's a little weird. More like, okay, now he has depression. Now he has something that negatively impacts his life, even leading to symptoms of disorders. Renal dysfunction, renal being kidney, dysfunction being it's not working properly, so it'll mess with your kidneys. And then necrotizing myopathy. This is a fun one. So this is actually based on a case study of a 23-year-old male who, let's say they used a bunch of differential diagnoses to try to figure out what was wrong with him. And then when they did a biopsy on him, they found out he had a case of necrotizing myopathy, which basically means dying muscles. It's the easiest way to say that. Generally not good for your health. So that's kind of remains to be seen whether or not that's across the board, but there is at least a case study backing up or supporting that as a potential side effect. So on to other types of PEDs. There's non-anabolic and androgenic compounds used for performance enhancement. This would include growth hormones, stimulants, and erythropoiesis stimulating agents. So these reasons generally are like cardiovascular. So if you're talking erythropoiesis, it improves believe the oxygen in your red blood cells, which allows for a little more cardiovascular endurance. Stimulants, think of your caffeine, your amphetamines, just improves your overall performance in the gym, out of the gym, during competition. That being said, they're not, just because you hear caffeine does not mean it's safe. There's no such thing as a safe stimulant. And then growth hormone, which is generally used mostly for recovery by athletes. Still, lots of negative side effects. Can't hammer that home enough. So, some of the negative side effects specifically of these types of compounds will include insulin resistance. If you don't know what insulin resistance is what your body releases naturally as a response to glucose in order to store that glucose into your cells. People with type 2 diabetes generally have an issue with insulin resistance where they have too much. So all that blood sugar or the blood glucose stays in there for longer, leading to high blood sugar. Not good for the health. People with type 1 maybe generally have an issue with the pancreas, so they don't secrete any. I can't explain, I can't even emphasize enough why we don't want to give ourselves type 2 diabetes. Myalgia specifically is like nerve pain. It means muscle pain, but think of whenever you have the flu, whenever you feel those aches and pains, that's an example of myalgia. Cardiac arrest, pretty straightforward. Don't really have to explain that one, but your heart literally stops. Heart palpitations and other irregular rhythms. Think of tachycardia and bradycardia, which just means too fast, too slow. Stimulants can mess up your heart really quick. If you ever had so much caffeine where you felt like your heart was going to beat out of its chest or like it's having irregular rhythms, that's an instance of a stimulant affecting your heart rate. So vasculitis, inflammation of the blood vessels, basically meaning you're going to have weaker blood vessels, easier to bursting. We call that an aneurysm. You don't want an aneurysm. All right. So, controversies. Preface. What are SARMs? SARMs, I've covered them a little earlier. Selective androgen receptor modules. What this means is it binds to a specific receptor or androgenic receptor. So you're not dealing with as much systematic effects. It really just kind of targets a localized area, so specifically muscle in this case, compared to normal anabolic steroids, testosterone, all that stuff, which kind of targets the whole body. That does not mean it's safer. I'm going to put that out there. It does not mean it's safer. It just means the effects are a little bit differently and the dosages are going to be different. Instagram and other platform-based influencers generally try to push this stuff out to their viewers. So, think of people like Kenny KO. I don't know if you ever watched him. He's a YouTuber. He used to push SARMs really hard on his generally young and gullible audience, saying, "Oh no, they're perfectly healthy. They're not like steroids. It's like it's perfectly healthy, no side effects." Well, research has proven that to be completely untrue. Their basis was actually originally looked at for medical reasons, specifically to help people recover after losing a lot of muscle mass due to a medical complication. And then the people researching it found that it was not safe and not really good for human consumption. Yet they're still legally allowed to sell them. Like, they tell you it's for science experiments. They tell you, oh, you're just supposed to do this type of research with it. But in reality, they know you're going to use it for, anabolic reasons. All right, so the SARMs girl controversy. Don't know if anyone ever heard about this. This was a TikTok influencer, 18-year-old girl who decided she was going to go on SARMs. Again, the ones we just mentioned. And she pretended it was, she's going to document her progress and any negative and positive effects and yada, yada, yada. In reality, she was doing it as a reason to... She didn't want to be patient for her physique. She wanted to take an easy route out. She said that in her own words. And, trying to document it under the guise of science wasn't quite so accurate, considering she didn't have any kind of control variables. There was no way to really know what she was doing outside of the SARMs. So, the fact that an 18-year-old is going to go and just make themselves into a lab rat, especially without knowing anything about science and how a study is done, is a bit insane, considering she's not even developed physically or neurologically yet. So just when you're 18, just because you're an adult, does not mean you are done developing physically. You still have a lot of neurological changes to do, and even times physical changes. So, like, you might even still be growing height-wise. Your muscle mass is still going to be increasing. Your nervous system in general, like, it doesn't just stop at 18. Generally, it's mid-20s when everything stops, and you could create long-term damage by injecting yourself with exogenous hormones and drugs before you're even done developing. So, risk factors. What are the risk factors associated with PED use? Well, high impulsivity and risk-taking behavior is definitely correlational. We generally see among those with who have experimented a lot with anabolic steroids or any other PED that they were already prone to risk-taking behavior. So stuff like experimentation with drugs, with using other needles, for stuff like heroin or any other type of drug. Even stuff like taking joyrides, getting arrested, getting in fights. All those risky behaviors are all correlated with a propensity to experiment with PEDs. Another potential risk factor will be pressure from coaches and peers. Now, this one I can't stress enough as a former athlete. Coaches are could be a little bit much sometimes. When you really have that much pressure put on you to win, you will sometimes do anything to win. It's a win at all costs attitude. It tends not to be very conducive for a healthy environment. Even your other peers, you might see maybe your buddy in football is doing a lot better than you. Maybe his 400-meter sprint's a lot quicker. Maybe he can go down the football field a lot quicker. Maybe he's a different team. They just won the last game. You find out they're all using gear. You're going to be more likely to hop back on it. And then another reason that causes this issue is that there's a lack of refusal skills. People just don't know how to say no. We've probably seen this a lot when we heard about talking about marijuana, about cocaine growing up. Just say no. But we don't really talk about that with PEDs. So teens, especially athletic teens, often don't develop any refusal skills and they don't know any alternatives. So they see PEDs and they don't know how to say no because I need this advantage and I don't want to disappoint my coaches. I don't want to disappoint my team. They don't have the ability to say no. Sorry about that again. So, prevention. Well, we can start by teaching refusal skills. What does that mean? Tell people how to say no, kind of like the DARE program did back when we were kids. Now, I'm not a big fan of the really aggressive approach where you're constantly demonizing everything. Sometimes that leads to teenagers wanting to act out. We've all been a teenager at some point. What's the last time you listened to an adult when they said, no, don't do that? It's bad for your health. I can't think of any situations where that's worked. But teaching them how to say no and the potential consequences of their action is going to be extremely beneficial. Right? Teaching them alternatives. We need to provide education such as sports nutrition and strength and conditioning. If we provide those alternatives, proper methods, tried and true methods of actually increasing your performance, maybe people won't feel like they need to take that way out with anabolic steroid use. Right? If I know enough about sports nutrition and strength conditioning where my performance is already great, I will be a lot less likely to want to do a PED. It's generally when people don't have any education, any knowledge, and they just don't know where else to go is where they're going to result to a PED. Now, the last part that we could really help for prevention would be providing social support. Being an athlete is stressful. Being a high school kid is stressful. We got body dysmorphia issues. You got to worry about how your peers look at you, your performance on the field, what your coaches think about you, what your parents think about you, even what your friends think about you. There's so much to worry about. There's so much stress involved that I cannot stress this enough. If we do not have some sort of social support from either other friends, from coaches, from counselors, from teachers, from our own parents, it's going to be very difficult to refuse the societal pressures that are placed upon us. We need to have a way to feel like we are okay, we are safe, that we don't need to be this unrealistic standard. And the best way to do that is going to be providing support. If you're a parent, provide support to your young athletes. Make sure you check up on them, see what they're going through, be there for them. Same if you're their friend, if you're the teacher, if you're their coach especially. Do not push any unrealistic expectations on them. We have to treat them like what they are, people. Specifically, in this case, kids. A lot of stress already involved going through puberty, right? Now, what are the health effects? So, this is related to physical, emotional, mental, social, and it all kind of plays together. So, physiologically, we have changes such as the acne, gynecomastia, even just the quick increase in muscle mass will have people maybe look at you a little differently, right? If they see something's up physiologically, kids tend to be a little cruel about it. You can get bullied for your acne, you get bullied for especially gynecomastia, right? Development of breast tissue as a man. All of that leads to emotional distress. On top of that, the PED usage also leads to depression itself. That's kind of part of the neurological effects of it. So all that combined will also lead to social dysfunction. You will feel alienated by your peers. You'll have issues with your self-image, right? You're going to have bad relationships with your peers, especially if you're more prone to outbursts, to anger, to rage. And it might not even be the PED use itself. It might just be the causes brought or the changes brought on by the depression, by the ostracizing, by the alienation, right? It all kinds of goes together in this little evil circle. Now, how does this relate to health? It affects, specifically public health, it affects both young athletic populations directly and indirectly. What do I mean by that? Well, directly, of course, because they're taking the PEDs. Now they have to deal with all the physiological changes and all the changes from their interpersonal lives. Indirectly, we don't really want a bunch of hypogonadal 18, 19, 20-year-olds in society. Hepatic dysfunction is also not particularly good. For obvious reasons, having liver failure tends to be looked down upon. It'll increase the burden on our health system. It'll increase the burden on even friends and loved ones who have to deal with the aftermath, right? So it's not just the specific population. Everybody's affected by this. If you're a parent and your teen is going through something horrible, especially as a result of PED use, you see physiological changes. You see them being stressed out. You see them getting bullied. You see them in pain from all this. You're not just going to be able to write it off. It's going to affect you, and it's going to affect, of course, the medical bills. What you have to do to take care of them and their long-term sustainability for life. Like, it's going to take years off their life, right? And then if you're hypogonadal, there's a chance that you might not even be able to reproduce. All right, what are the current resources being utilized? Well, this is funny you ask because there's none. There's some here and there. It's not really an issue that gets tackled that often. We tend to overlook this. We think about marijuana, we think about cocaine, think about MDMA, alcohol. We've all seen the ads. They smoked a blunt once and their head exploded or something like that. Or this is drunk driving. But we don't talk about PED usage, even though it's pretty prevalent. Back when I was an athlete in high school, the amount of times I've noticed people even shooting up in the locker room sometimes, right? Again, 3.3% of total high schoolers. You probably knew someone on something. There are some resources though. In the case of Athena and Atlas, which are both programs made to teach refusal skills and other sports-related skills in order to prevent steroid use, right? Another issue is there's not a lot of regulation for influencers and high school athletics. So there's not that much drug testing when it comes to middle and high school athletics. There's not a lot of regulation on it when it comes to, specifically how the coaches push their kids, what the requirements are for how much they're allowed to really participate in that. As far as the influencers go, there's almost no regulation on the stuff they push to their viewers, right? Like Kenny KO, for instance, with the SARMs thing, there was no legal fallout with that because SARMs are technically legal, but you see influencers pushing weird products all the time. Even if it's not drugs, you have random supplements that don't seem to make any sense, and there's absolutely no regulation on, first of all, how you could advertise based on whether or not you're being transparent. There's no transparency at all. Sometimes they just have really good lighting. Maybe they took vasodilators. They got a pump, quote unquote, beforehand, to make the muscle look bigger because of the increased blood flow. And then they pick the perfect lighting and filters. And sometimes they're even on PEDs. And then they push that unhealthy, unrealistic body image on people, and they use that to sell products. There needs to be a little more regulation on that. You need to have some transparency when it comes to pushing a product. All right, so what do we need to do? Well, we need to have regulation on products and transparency for influencers. So SARMs specifically, if anabolic steroids are going to be banned, we should ban SARMs. They're not really that different. They have a lot of similar effects. Transparency for influencers. There should be a disclosure, kind of like what YouTube does now when it's requiring you to disclose if you're sponsored. should be the same thing for influencers. If you're trying to push a product, there should be transparency saying, this is not at all this does not at all reflect how I actually look day in, day out, or this is not how I got to this specific physique or this specific metric, right? We also have to reduce the social pressure. So we put way too much pressure on young athletes to perform. We don't seem to have any idea the amount of stress it puts on them. Like we say, oh yeah, I hope you do well this game. Okay, that's fine. But then you say, yeah, you better win this game. That's going to put a lot of stress on them, a lot of pressure. And when you feel pressured to perform, you will do anything you need to perform. Right? When you provide support and education, take care of your friends, take care of your kids, take care of your students. Right? Be there for them. Be there as a counselor. Provide guidance. Make sure they're doing okay. Right? Don't let them feel like they're alone, alienated, that they have to rely on some sort of drug to get the edge they need. And that's what the whole education's for. We teach them sports nutrition. We teach them effective ways for strength and conditioning, so they don't have to rely on drugs. Now, refusal skills. We have to provide those. We have to literally teach them how to say no. If we get rid of all the pressure, if we get rid of all the need for education, then the refusal skill is going to be the easiest part, because now you've taken out all the factors that influence their initial reason to say yes. Now you've got to teach them to say no. Right? And drug testing regulation for all athletics. I can name on negative hands the amount of times that I've ever been drug tested for any competition. There's basically none there's definitely none for middle school athletics. Even for high school athletics, I can't name a lot of competitions where they actually test their athletes. Maybe in some powerlifting meets, you'll get drug tested if it's a national one. But for the most part, high school football, wrestling, volleyball, swimming, track, none of them really test their athletes. If we put a requirement for drug testing, at least people are going to be less likely to try to break it, right? And then we need a program like Atlas or Athena at every single high school and middle school with athletic competitions. This should not be something for select schools. I'm sure we could find the funding to teach these kids the appropriate skills so they don't end up going down a bad route. If we don't have the funding to teach them those skills to prevent them from hurting themselves, then maybe we shouldn't be having athletics. Based on athletic budgets at most major campuses, I can't see how we wouldn't be able to fit it in. All right, so conclusion. We need prevention programs. We need regulation. We need to reduce societal pressure, and we need to teach them skills and alternatives to steroids. Right? We have the cure. Now we just need to distribute it. It's all about logistics at this point. We have Atlas, we have Athena, we have the knowledge. We have people who are educated in sports nutrition, in exercise physiology, and strength and conditioning. I even got a lot of education on anabolic steroid use just through my Essentials of Strength and Conditioning book that I use for the CSCS. Right? It's not like there's no abundance of information out here. We just need to apply it to our kids. We've got to start caring about our kids. These are just all my references. I hope you guys enjoy the presentation. Sorry if it's a little awkward. Random cat jumping through. Anyone with animals probably understands that it's not perfect when you have a cat. They like to do whatever they do. But I've been recording this thing about 500 times now, so I think I'll end it here. All right. Have a good day, guys.